Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me thank you for being here. The stories on this podcast are meant to let you know that you're not alone in what you're going through, and that we can all find strength in struggle with the right perspective. If you've been enjoying the podcast, let me ask that you leave a review on your platform of choice to help us grow so that we can continue to make the world a better place, one conversation at a time. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 60. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very special guest in New York, Todd Cuccia. Todd, what's going on, man?
My man, so awesome seeing you. We got to do the 30-second catch-up here before we hit record, but awesome seeing that face of yours here on screen and really looking forward to jamming here.
Me too, man. Yeah, it's been a while, and for context, you and I connected through our mutual friend, Coach Sam Tooley. We had a great conversation on the Pursuit podcast when that was back up and running. And since then, life's changed a lot for both of us. And so I obviously want to hear about what's going on with you, but why don't you just introduce yourself to the audience before we get started?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this is cool because it's kind of a second lap for Joe and I. Like you said, we did jump on a podcast with him and Sam that they co-hosted. So here we are for round two, maybe kind of a 30,000 foot view for your listeners. My name is Todd Cuccia, like Joe mentioned. I'm 38 years old, which once again, just like the last time we did this, makes me extremely old relative to my host here, my handsome host that I'm looking at. I live in Westchester County. It's a suburb about 30 minutes north of Manhattan. I live here with my beautiful wife, Caitlin, and our three little boys, ages 7, 5, and 3. Each one of them kind of crazier than the last would be my disclaimer on those three. Let's see. We've been out in the burbs, Joe, for about 7 years. We made the fairly predictable move out here before we had our first. I work at a New York City based hedge fund alternative asset manager. We run about $5.5 billion in credit and equity. I'm one of kind of 35 employees there. I've been there for 5.5 years. I was a guy who was kind of commuting into the city at 5 o'clock in the morning and coming home at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and kind of saw that in my foreseeable future. I kind of currently come to you as a guy who's in the city 3 and sometimes 4 days a week, and now has this added flexibility of working from home, which is I'm quick to raise my hand and say it's fantastic. I'm playing with house money in terms of the ability to spend more time with my kids than I certainly thought was realistic if you had asked me a few years ago. That's it. I take, you and I have connected on a number of things, but I think, certainly towards the top of that list is probably living with kind of a growth mindset. I think it served both of us well. I think that's where we've connected on a number of things. And I'm sure you and I can kind of stretch on that and unpack that. But, it's something that for me translates into kind of my personal life, my professional life, kind of my family life, which lives atop, all these things, which I'm sure we'll stretch on, but, I'll zip it there, but that's kind of the quick rundown.
Awesome, man. So 7, 5, and 3. Where's the 1-year-old?
The 1-year-old is now almost. Well, the 1 is almost 3. The 4th is not fully out of the question here, but there's a little bit of a TBD component there. Listen, we do live in a world of chaos here. I think you and I have gotten to know each other well enough now that like I tend to be most comfortable when it's most chaotic in this house. If Caitlin was in the room while I made that statement, she'd probably, smack me in the back of the head. But when this house is its nuttiest and kind of most chaotic is frankly when I feel the most comfortable. Being a dad, this is probably part of a separate conversation, but it's the coolest job on the planet. It's the job I take most serious. And when this house is humming, and it hums a lot, is when I kind of feel my best, and when this house feels most normal to me, ironically. So there's plenty of action here with the 7-5. The 2 is almost 3. He might be the craziest of the 3, but plenty of energy in this house. That's not a concern.
Yeah, and you handle the energy well, it sounds like, and obviously you and I share a lot of the growth mindset, personal development, striving to be better each day in common. But when did that start for you? Have you always been like that?
Yeah, great question. So the short answer is no, and I can certainly stretch on that. So the growth mindset and kind of like understanding how and where to apply that mindset for me really came, as I mentioned, I'm 38 years old right now. My 7-year old will be 8 in February, and frankly, I kind of adopted this let's call it a lifestyle when my wife and when we were pregnant with our first. So kind of call it 7-8 years ago, call it 2016 type era. So shoot, that brings me back to kind of like 30, 31 years old, 32 years old, call it. And prior to that, Joe, I would just say there was probably much more of a in my 20s. I was living in Manhattan. Right out of school, I lived with a roommate. After that, I lived by myself for 5, 6 years in Midtown Manhattan. I was working, as hard as can be, obviously trying to make my way up the ranks, within Wall Street, within the Wall Street profession. And I was doing, frankly, what I think probably a lot of 20-something-year-olds do, living in Midtown, working in finance, thinking that they can go out 4 or 5 nights a week like it's an extension of college. I think somewhere in my late 20s, there was kind of a pivot towards like, okay, maybe we dial this back and start thinking about kind of how to formalize kind of the next chapter of my life, which certainly meant settling down with Caitlin and ultimately building a family. But to answer your question, really kind of after we got married in 2013. I would say in the year or 2 years following that, while we were pregnant with our first, and I was kind of like, I had kind of settled into this, like, well, I'm going to be a dad. And, there's really, when's there going to be time to do anything when there's a dad? I broke my foot. The risk of boring your listeners here. I broke my foot while we were pregnant,
Oh,
actually. I broke my left foot. It was the sesamoid bone under my big toe. I was in a boot and crutches for close to 4 or 5 months. And actually during those 4 or 5 months is when I kind of dove in like face first into all things Goggins and
yeah.
Jocko. And, I started listening to a lot more podcasts around these types of topics, endurance training, Rich Roll, Tim Ferriss, nothing new to you. I see you nodding your head. And it was one of those where, like, when we had our first son, I was kind of like left with this astounding sense of like, how much am I kind of leaving on the table, and how much improvement can I drive, in my personal life and in my professional life. And I used the physical aspect of a lot of the things that I was learning, from those various people I just mentioned. And nowadays, frankly, from people like yourself on social, to help drive, kind of improved outcomes, better outcomes in my personal and professional life. But frankly, most of it started with learning how to push myself physically and kind of transforming myself physically. I was never like an obese, out of shape dude, but I was a 20-something-old who probably went out too much, had a bunch, had too many beers, and weighed, I was 6'1", 200. I'm 6'1", 180 right now, with a totally different frame. And, the physical part has translated into other areas of my life, as I think about these last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And one of my favorite things is to talk about fitness and how fitness translates to life. And I think when we struggle with things that are between our ears, when things are just mental, it's really hard to grab onto those things and to make tangible changes. And I think fitness and physical exertion, physical challenges are a really great way to reveal those mental limits and to attack those barriers and to grow through that. So I'm actually going to go a little bit of out of order here, Todd, in terms of the normal questioning, but what's the hardest thing that you've ever done in life in the physical realm? And why have you chosen to do that thing?
Yeah. Another good one. I knew you'd be loaded with good ones tonight, Joe. Listen, in these last few years, as I think about the fitness angle, and more specifically the endurance training, I've run kind of 4 or 5 marathons, 5 marathons in these last 2-ish years, 2+ years. I've done a bunch of triathlons. I've done a bunch of, trail races. A few weeks ago, I did a team relay, 120-mile race up in Vermont. That was like a team relay, kind of, 24 hours to get 120 miles done, stuff like that. This is stuff that I very purposely sign up for in search of a certain level of feedback from these events, really post the event. I guess to more specifically answer your question, I ran a marathon. I was supposed to run New York City 2020. And it was canceled. It wasn't canceled until about a month before, because NYRR took as long as they could before they kind of finalized like we can't pull this off. And my brother-in-law and I, quite cool, and it's kind of something I'll never forget. We kind of went rogue, having knocked out a bunch of the training, and I know you're familiar with this, getting ready for New York yourself. Those miles weren't certainly going to go to waste. So the two of us drove up to London, took a ferry over to Fisher's Island, and kind of set up our own course. We mapped out the 26.2. We put our own fuel at kind of these made up stations that we laid out there. And we woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning and ran a marathon in Fisher's, with earbuds in, with a playlist on your own. It was drastically different than the New York City Marathon I would run 12 months later in front of, however many tens of thousands of people on First Avenue. But that Fisher's experience really sticks out as something where when the clock struck 26.2, I just remember feeling this overwhelming sense of pride, pride in the training, frankly, and the fact that the marathon was really just the result of a heck of a lot of hard work. And I think, Joe, honestly, it was more, I was left with this kind of what can I do next? And again, like maybe, just to hit on another theme once again of kind of what else am I leaving out there? I do remember thinking that in 2020, which is when I wanted to start taking some of this training to the next level. So that marathon, for sure. I ran another one, also locally, kind of here in Westchester County. And then I ran New York City last year. So I do think there's something to be said for that 26.2. I think anyone who's listening to this podcast who hasn't run a marathon, get one on the books at some point in the next couple of years. It's an incredibly important accomplishment to check off the box for a number of different reasons. Frankly, at the top of that list is probably the training block, and staying committed to a training block and understanding the importance of how to stay healthy through a training block and how to build real volume. And I learned a lot, during that process, that the race was really just the end result. But training for these events is what fires me up. Running in Vermont at 3 o'clock in the morning with a headlamp on was amazing, but banging out, a bunch of 35 and 40 mile weeks in the month and a half leading up to that is actually what fed me while I was in Vermont. So I am a process guy. I am a systems guy. It feeds into results. I think process, wins over ultimate goals. Yeah, anyway, long-winded answer there. Sorry.
That's beautiful. And I would imagine there are a lot of people listening to this podcast, and, I've experienced this. I think we all experience this. You said you were going to do this training block. Things are going well for the first 4 weeks. Week number 5 rolls around. It's cold. You're tired. You wake up and you just say to yourself, I'll just skip this one. What keeps you going through that? And what is motivating you, or what is pulling you out of bed on those mornings to get the training done when there's really no immediate reward for that training on that specific day?
Yeah. So this is something I think about a lot. And I know for sure, I know that I'm talking to someone whose alarm is set for 3 or 4 a.m. every day. So I know you can relate to just about everything I'm about to say. But for me, Joe, it's almost exclusively the feeling that I have when I'm done. And I basically just tap into that. There's a certain level of preparation the night before all the stuff. Tonight, when I go to bed, I will lay my shit out for tomorrow morning, so that there's one less thing to think about in the morning. I've done that for a number of years. I do play out, like maybe this is cheesy, but I do play out the next morning in my head. I do believe in the power of visualization. I actually see myself running up Madison tomorrow morning and like turning at 59th Street, coming down Fifth Avenue, going, showering up by my office, popping upstairs. And when I think about popping upstairs to my office after all that, there's a certain level of accomplishment attached to that. And that's what wakes me up. To translate that into a Saturday morning, if it's like for you right now, getting ready for New York, you have to wake up on a Saturday, Sunday, you have 18 miles to your face. How am I going to feel when I finish that 18? And by the way, if you feel awesome, awesome. If you don't feel awesome and you're bummed out about how you felt during that run, also awesome, because you just got something that you can learn from. So running and fitness provide this very real and very tangible feedback that has become a must-have for me. And that feedback, to put it to put a cheesy finance analogy on it, like it's the return on my time, the return on my 90 minutes in the morning is so juicy, because that payback and that dividend is basically 12 to 14 hours of productivity and fulfillment, frankly, because I'm lucky. I enjoy what I do, but I'm less myself if I don't get stuff done in the morning. So again, just going back to your question, what gets me out is knowing, when I come out of on Monday mornings, I usually do a little shakeout run on the trails. Now I'm getting ready for this race a couple weekends from now. What gets me out of bed is thinking, how sweet is it going to be when I open the garage door, when I come in from the 6 or 7 miles and I pour that first cup of coffee and my 5-year-old comes downstairs and like tries to headbutt me, like, so when my alarm clock goes off, I'm playing that plus 90 minutes out in my head.
Yeah. So obviously at 38 years old, you've still got a lot of juice left in your legs. Have you ever thought about what happens when, maybe you're 90? So let's fast forward, 90-year-old Todd gets out of bed in the morning and he can't go for a run. Or maybe that run looks different. Maybe it's a walk, or maybe it's something different. Like, have you thought about what happens when that physicality is forced to be changed for you at some point? Because I think about that sometimes.
That's super interesting. Yeah. Well, two things. One, I think you just nailed it on the head in that I think I would transition to walking because I do like when I think about some stressful work days, I tend to work from home either on Mondays or Fridays, sometimes just Fridays. And if it's a stressful work day, I do find the benefit of like throwing AirPods in, listening to some chill music or a podcast, even for 20 or 30 minutes and just walking, as opposed to being married to like, I have to run this pace for exactly 10 miles. Sometimes just walking is extremely relaxing. So short answer is I'd probably pivot into a power walker. Maybe I'll upgrade it to power walking. And then the second thought I have is, and I think that you can relate to this because I think you've probably seen a lot of this too, is I know a lot of complete savages who are 10 or 15 years my senior.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about that, and I think about some of these guys who are running, 2:45s and, sub 3 marathons at 50, 55 years old. I mean, obviously Ken Rideout comes to mind because he just ran a 2:35 in Berlin, who I was lucky enough to meet at our buddy Brian Maz's this retreat that I went to in May. I met Ken there. So Ken is 51 years old, father of 4, right, and just ran a 2:35. He's certainly not the only one. There's plenty of other folks out there who are, in their 40s or 50s and are seemingly pushing the limits far beyond, what I would have deemed possible 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm not quite. I love the question because that is super interesting. And now I'm picturing my 90-year-old ass like stumbling around Larchmont, walking at 5 o'clock in the morning. But I do have a lot of juice left, to steal your term. And when I think about the next like 10 years or 15 years, like maybe it's, jumping into some kind of a high rocks type competition. Maybe it's jumping in back into half iron or just focusing on trails or whatever. But this ability to kind of like jump in and out of certain modalities, if you will, of fitness is super exciting to me, because those races, and more specifically training for those races, is what feeds these other areas of my life.
Yeah. So I have 2 thoughts here. I'm going to try my best to use these thoughts to bridge us to the next question as smooth as possible. But the first is, in the world of physical therapy, I've had the privilege of working with a wide range of patients. And the older patients who do the best in physical therapy are the ones who are the most active. They walk, they jog, they bike, they swim. They don't stop moving. And there's a huge difference between the older population who stopped moving, maybe in their 40s, or they had kids, or life got busy and they stopped exercising. It's really hard to get back into things, versus the population that never stops. So that's the first point. The second point, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard recently on a podcast that Warren Buffett accumulated most of his wealth after he was 65 years old. And it's the concept of, right, is he a great investor? Maybe. Or is he a really good investor that has been really good for a really long period of time? And it's that consistency over time. So where I'm going with this is, the stock market to me is this beautiful parallel to life in a lot of ways, where there are good days, there are bad days, there are ups, there are downs. There are a lot of factors that lead to a result on any given day, and a lot of that is outside of our control. And in life, the same thing happens, right? We have good days, bad days, easy seasons, hard seasons. My question for you, Todd, is what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle in life that was outside of your control?
It's a great one. Let's see. That's a great question.
Thanks, man. You can tie in finance as you see fit, as you are an expert.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I'll like, here's where my brain's kind of going on that is, so I have two loving, incredible parents who, thank God, are still alive and doing well, and wonderful family. Older sisters that I grew up with, who I'm obviously still incredibly close with, etc. So there is no, like, I'm very fortunate in that I there's no one immediate thing that comes to mind in terms of losing a dear friend or a family member. The first thing I just thought about when you asked that super insightful question is basically this concept that everybody takes a different path to success. And to put it super bluntly, and then I can unpack this, is I was a pretty bad student as a kid. I struggled with that. I was not like, I struggled with education in general. As I think about kind of K through 12, my high school experience was amazing, incredible. And I have lifelong friends from high school, but I didn't understand the concept of how hard I needed to work in order to go to the schools that I probably could have and should have gone to. I'm incredibly proud, by the way, my disclaimer there is I'm incredibly proud to be a graduate from the University of Scranton. I had an amazing time there as well. But I struggled as a student, just to put it bluntly, both in high school and college, in trying to stay focused and in understanding the bigger picture. It's not for lack of my parents trying, for sure. But I remember just always kind of thinking, like, I got to get into it. I got to get into the real world. And I feel like I can apply some of my skill sets more there. So I think kind of bobbing and weaving my way, there was I had an early age. I had an internship, Joe, after my junior year. I was a floor broker down on the New York Mercantile Exchange. And that was that first time where I was like, okay, I was right. There is something here. There's a certain energy to this business that I can really relate to. And I want to be involved here. But I didn't graduate, from the top of my class at Harvard or Princeton or Yale or Cornell. And so I did have to take kind of a different path to where I've gotten, within this business. So I think that as I think about the first, like, kind of 5 to 7 years, like, ultimately getting to where I needed to be to put me on a track to work at the type of firm that I'm at now and be surrounded with the kind of the caliber of folks that I work with right now. I mean, I may be the only person on our floor who isn't Ivy League educated, frankly. And that, by the way, kudos to all them. I'm lucky enough to work with an incredibly talented and hardworking team who also happen to be great humans. So they check the box across the board there. But I'm proud of getting to where I did, because I think that when I think about that cohort of individuals, I think about someone who aced everything in high school and aced everything in college. And it just didn't come to me like that, frankly. I was a horrible tester. I put way more of an emphasis on athletics than I did on academics. And I think somewhere in my 20s, it just kind of clicked, where I was like, okay, well, now it's time to go to work. And this is what like hard work is going to look like for me. And I had to kind of redefine, my own path and what success was going to look like for me and how to get there. But it didn't come from, graduating at the top of my class in high school and going to like the perfect university that would walk me into a banking internship or a first banking job at Goldman out of school or whatever. So I think that's something I think about. I got a little bit of there's a built-in chip on my shoulder about that. That frankly has like played to my advantage, because now I like to think that, like, I'm going to show up, before you, I'm going to leave after you, and I'm going to outwork you while I'm there. And that's kind of how I approach like my professional life. And that's how I've viewed it for a while now, frankly. I think it's served me well, but Monday morning quarterback says, I wish I had handled myself differently, in terms of academics in high school and college. And I've got a few ideas up my sleeve on how I want to handle that with my hyperactive sons.
Oh man, that sounds like a great challenge. When you're in that environment where you are starting off professionally and you're surrounded by these people who have gone to these Ivy League schools, and maybe they have different credentials than you, and you're starting in this position where you're different, right? What is the mindset that gets you through there? And do you ever feel like an imposter in that
Yeah,
situation?
totally. Yeah. Yes. The answer there is that I have felt like that often. Actually, these last few years is really the first time that I haven't felt like that, because now I just wear exactly who I am, and I'm not trying to be someone that I'm not, which is to say, I know exactly what I'm good at. I know what my skill set entails. I know what I can bring to the table for an organization. I understand where I add value, and I certainly understand where I don't. I think I was trying to add value in areas that weren't, part of my inherent skill set. And I think that I've just like owned up to, this is what you're really good at. Here's some stuff that you're not. And on the stuff that you're not, don't be afraid to ask questions. Which, to the extent that you have any younger listeners, listening to this, like, would be my very first piece of advice for someone, forget Wall Street, I would just say across industry, asking tons and tons of questions would be at the top of my list in terms of important pieces of advice. That's something I tomorrow morning at my office, I will ask several questions to people much smarter than me. So it's something I still do every single day. But it's another great question from you. The short answer is I have felt like that. I do remember feeling like I was trying to do what other people were doing within our investment team. And here I am at 38 years old. Frankly, Joe, like, it really wasn't until this last handful of years that I was like, dude, that's not what you're actually good at. Like, here are the X number of things that you are good at. Lean into those things, get even better at them, and help people understand, why they can count on you, and why they can count on you on a consistent basis, and exactly where, you're going to be value add. The more and more I've bought into that kind of framework, the more success that I've found. But it took a while, which is why it's a really great question for me.
Appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. I want to pick your brain on kind of the concept of investing in yourself when you're maybe not at a high point. So, I think anybody listening has probably heard the phrase "buy the dip," and it's more nuanced than that. I'm sure you know that better than anybody, but the concept is essentially, when the market is low, when people are afraid, when people aren't feeling good, that's probably a good entry point, so that you can then ride the wave up and get a good return on your investment. And I think the same applies for our lives when we're having tough days, hard seasons, when you don't feel like investing, when you're afraid, when maybe you don't want to. That's when you get the most return on your investment, on the energy, on the effort, on pouring into yourself so that you can grow down the road. I'm curious what you think about that, and also if there are other lessons from finance that carry over to life in your view.
For sure. My first hope is that anyone who's listening to this has not been buying the dip for the last 10 months. So let's get that out there first. Hopefully the buy the dip crowd took their foot off the gas about a year ago. But maybe they can buy the dip in these next 6 months or so. Yeah. So listen, I think that question kind of goes back to something that you and I have talked about in the past, actually, which is really about building a foundation around what your system looks like. For me, investing in myself, to steal your term, which can mean a million different things to a million different people. For me, investing in myself typically means what you and I just talked about, which is kind of like putting forth some kind of an effort, breaking a sweat of some kind for 60 minutes or 90 minutes in the morning in order to put myself in a position, to steal one of your terms, Joe, to win that day, as you've talked about a bunch. Investing in yourself is the most important thing that anyone listening to this podcast can do. I think it's often overlooked. It does feel like it's getting more and more attention these last couple of years, and people understanding the importance of self-growth and self-care, self-development, being selfless. I've talked about this concept around, like, serving myself in the morning in order to serve the people that I care the most about. That's something I think about a lot. It's something I take serious. And that can mean a bunch of different things. That can mean something as obvious as serving Caitlin and the boys. And that can also mean, serving the founder of my firm, serving the employees at our firm to help move the ball downfield for us as an organization. It can also mean 50 other things in my life or anyone else's. But investing in yourself and having a clear cut, kind of definition of what like kind of who do you want to be? What do you stand for? How do you want to feel? That's another good one. I think about that all the time. Like how do I want to feel, each and every day as I operate, hopefully at a really high level. Well, the way that you operate at a high level is by investing in yourself. For someone listening to this call, that could mean investing in a coach. It could be a life coach. It could be Joe, frankly, on this call. It could be someone to help with fitness programming. It could be someone to help from an accountability perspective. I've tapped into that before. I've taken some mindset classes. I've done fitness programming. I've used trainers. I think having a coach is huge. So that would certainly be categorized as investing in yourself. Again, return, like think about your return, like the return on this investment, if you're patient, will far outweigh the initial cost of the investment itself. And that is to your point, like that's the power of time. I think that the reason why a lot of people probably aren't able to see that through is because we live in this immediate gratification world. And if people put some work in and they expect, results in the short term, then they're probably not going to see them because it takes a really, really long time in order to see those results. So, time is your friend. And that's certainly true as you think about financial markets and kind of the power of compound interest, which I guess is a separate conversation. But it's also true in how you think about how you treat yourself and the ways in which you invest in yourself. That could mean investing in yourself could literally mean signing up for one incredibly challenging race once a quarter. It could mean taking an incredible trip with your wife once a year, just the two of you. It can mean a bunch of different things, but invest in yourself. And before you do that, understand, what investing in yourself really means, and what you want it to mean to you. The more personalized you get, the better. The self-dialogue and the self-conversation people have with understanding what investing in yourself really means, because I think we also live in this world of, consume, but, what lights you up and what investing in yourself might look very different than me investing in myself and what the next five guys to our right and left looks in investing in themselves. So define, what that means to you. Define like what a really good outcome is if you do invest in yourself, and then take the necessary steps, to do just that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I would add that I think the best investments that I've made in myself have not been comfortable. And I have a quote from Seth Godin. He said, "The road to comfort is crowded and it rarely gets you there. Ironically, it's those who seek out discomfort that are able to make a difference and find their footing." And I feel like a lot of the things you mentioned, whether it's seeking out coaching or signing up for a race or making time for the things that are important, those aren't easy things. Those aren't comfortable things. Sometimes they're not even convenient things, but they're all really, really important for our growth. And I think that's important to just understand, is that investing in yourself isn't always comfortable. But sometimes that's what you need to do in order to get to the next level. And anything else there, Todd?
It's really well said. I would just tag on to that point and say that when you do step outside your comfort zone, and when you do try things that you think may be totally impossible, and suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I do have this. Okay, Joe, signed up for the New York City Marathon. Holy cow, that's a really daunting task. Okay, well, here's your block. Here's what each week looks like, etc. When you finish these events, for me, what I have found is I am like stacked sky high. Honestly, sure, with a certain level of pride for sure, but more so with gratitude, with a certain level of gratitude. And oh my God, I'm just so lucky to have been able to do these events and to physically get through it, but also that, Caitlin even provides me with a leash to put forth the training and to spend as much time on stuff like this as I can. And I find myself, I came back from that Vermont race and was like, I had this really kind of astounding sense of, I can't believe, that I get to come home to these 3 boys and Caitlin, and that this is kind of like the life that we've built together. And that doesn't mean that like I didn't feel that way before the race, but I'm telling you, there's this heightened sense of awareness around like where you are in your life, or maybe where you want to be after you go through something that shakes your tree. So sign up for shit like that, because when you finish them, you're going to have like an aha moment. And I've been fortunate enough to have a bunch of those moments that have kind of pointed me in the next direction. And it's, it's been a really good feedback loop for me.
Yeah. Now, we don't have to go too far down this path, but I am curious for you, Todd. How do you manage time around family, around fitness, around work, and around, I'm sure, the other things that you do that we haven't even touched on yet? How do you manage all that time?
Yeah, you forgot youth hockey. So yeah, probably the best way I would break that down is, as I think about fitness, I haven't worked out. The fitness part is short and sweet, because I haven't worked out at night in probably like 5 or 6 years. So for me, it's all mornings. The mornings kind of feed my whole day. So a typical morning for me, assuming it's not the random, night or a couple nights a month where I might have something on the social calendar that would keep me out late or whatever. If this is just a kind of a standard Monday through Friday morning, I'm looking at a good 90-minute window pre-work. Once that's done, I'm kind of dialed in and focused on the workday. As I think about that in the context of when that day would wrap up, I'm thinking somewhere between kind of 4:30 and 6 p.m., something like that. Most nights, again, if there isn't something on the calendar or a business dinner of some sort, my first priority is getting home to the kids, or if they have, going back to the sports conversation, if they have sports. Frankly, I'm coaching a lot of those sports, so racing home to get to a lot of those sports. I'm coaching 2 travel hockey teams right now, one for my oldest, one for my middle guy. Somehow, some way, hockey in Westchester County has turned into like football in Texas. And it's this massive kind of time commitment, but it's an amazing experience that I get to have with my kids. I wouldn't have it any other way. But managing that calendar is an exercise in itself, frankly. But yeah, no, listen, like for me, the importance each day in getting a sweat in the morning, feeling like I had a really solid, productive day at work, despite incredibly volatile and frustrating and difficult markets. And then getting back from the city and having dinner with my family. I mean, I remember as a kid, the garage door would open, which meant my dad was home from the train, and he'd pop upstairs and loosen his tie and sit down at the dinner table. And for me as a kid, that was the coolest 30 minutes of the day. So it's important to me that we sit down as a family, that we eat dinner together, that we turn the YouTube off, that we say grace, that we talk about everyone's day. Like that's a really important 20 minutes to me. And then I won't bore you with the details of trying to get these animals upstairs and bathed and ready for bed, because that's its own podcast. But yeah, that's kind of a typical day. And then I try and wake up the next morning and do the same thing.
Yeah, man, you've got your hands full, but all great stuff. So next question, Todd's a simple one, but to do everything that you're doing requires endurance. And it's a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But when you hear the word endurance, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So endurance to me is really like an ability to withstand a level of adversity, or a consistent level of adversity, I'd say, on a pretty consistent basis, while staying really, really committed to your goals. And I guess what I really mean by that, Joe, is someone who is able to display endurance in the long term is someone who has a system down, who has a process, who's committed to that system and process, and is able to get up each morning, check the boxes, get the things done that he or she need to get done in order to live this life of purpose, and work closer and closer towards whatever their definition of success might look like in their personal life and their professional life. The ability to do that on the days that you feel like you want to do it, the days that you have it, right? In athlete terms, some days you got it, some days you don't. The ability to wake up and get that done on the days that you have it, but way more importantly, the ability to wake up and get that done on the days that you don't, to me, is what defines someone who really gets endurance. And the people who get what endurance is and how effective it can be are the people who have the time to wait for it to play out. Because if you display, I guess what I mean by that is, if you display a certain level of endurance, it's still going to take time in order for you to see the results of that endurance. Do I think that participating in actual endurance event, physical endurance events, is transferable and translate to kind of everything I just said? 100%. I'm a firm believer of that. But to me, it's not just, when you say the word endurance, I don't think about someone running a 3.5 hour marathon. I think about someone who's able to bring it every single day, regardless of whether they want to or not. That's the punchline would be, I'm going to bring it today, regardless of whether or not I want to. And if I do, I'm going to get to where I want to go.
Yeah. I think it's been said that commitment is doing what you said you would do long after the mood you set it in has left you. And I think that speaks to, right, you wake up in the morning, you either have it or you don't, but either way, you're going to do what you said you were going to do. And that's incredibly powerful. And I guess just a follow-up question, Todd, for people who don't feel like they have that purpose, they don't know exactly where they want to go. They might not even have a general direction. What would you say to those people? Putting you on the
That's a good
spot.
one.
Yeah.
Well, there's a few different ways to think through that, because I think if you're on the younger side, I think it's incredibly normal that you might feel this way. And frankly, I think there are people on the older side who also would feel that way. And my first piece of advice or feedback would be to accept that, and that's totally normal. I think especially right now, we're living in this world where people are trying to figure out exactly what they want their life to look like and how they want to be defined. And maybe they're in a more traditional job and want to explore something more entrepreneurial, in spirit. My thought process there would be that you can do both. And that you can try a bunch of different things before you really can start to understand what lights you up. But in order to really know and understand what lights you up and what you're good at and what provides you with a certain level of happiness, you have to try all of those things. And that's, again, speaking both on a personal level and professionally. So if you feel stuck at your job, you want to try something new, well, then stay in that job, because you're probably an adult with fixed costs, and that's probably scary you. Maybe you have rent to pay or mortgage to pay, but start to dip your toe into those other areas that might interest you and see how that feels. Start having conversations with people in that area and see how those conversations go. Don't get married to well, I'm in ad sales and I hate it. I work on Wall Street, I hate it. You name the career path that someone's taking ahead. Well, if that's the case, you got to do something about it. Because cheesy as this may sound, life is truly too short for you not to wake up, kick the sheets off your bed, and be fired up. So go find out what fires you up. And if you think it's going to happen like that, it's not. Again, the power of time. We've talked about this a few times on here. That's going to take you some time, but you sulking about it and you being bummed out about it and wondering did I major in the right thing in college? Or maybe I should have taken that first job. Just stand up, dust it off a little bit, understand where you're at, where you want to be. You don't have to quit your job, today and go start something just so you can say you're a creative type, or you want to be an entrepreneur. Try to do both, and understand what that looks like and how that feels. And the closer you can get to something that you're good at and you can monetize and you enjoy doing, then the closer you're getting to living a life of happiness and fulfillment. And I root that everyone feels that way, because that's in a perfect world, that's how we'd all operate, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to share a quick story to just give my spin on everything you just said. looking back, I started my first job right out of PT school. And pretty early on, I understood that it wasn't something I wanted to do forever. And I was lucky enough that the pandemic coincided with the end of my first year of work. Sam and I started the Pursuit podcast around that time. And all these wheels started spinning. Things were set in motion. And I realized, okay, I'm going to eventually leave this job. So I might as well start planning for that now. I had dozens, if not hundreds, of conversations with people that were close to me, family, friends, complete strangers, people like Sam who ran their own businesses, who did their own thing. And I did my due diligence, in which with each conversation, I got a little bit closer and a little bit more clear on where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. Meanwhile, that whole time, I'm working 40, 45, 50 hours a week at a clinic. I am getting up early in the morning, prospecting new clients. I'm staying up late at night programming workouts. I'm taking coaching calls in the car on the weekend. Every waking moment, I'm doing something to make sure that I can build this thing to the point where it makes sense to leave my job. And I share all that because people reach out to me all the time, assuming that I made this big leap. I one day was working a job and the next day I wasn't. And while that did happen when I left, there was a buildup and there was a very intentional buildup. And it took a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, but I did it on purpose. And I want to share that because what you said really strikes a chord, Todd. I think, you don't have to make this big change right now. You don't even have to know where you're going. You just have to be willing and able to take these small steps to gain information, to make adjustments, to start building something until you get to the place where you can make that bigger change. And little by little, little becomes a lot. And I think that concept of compound interest, investing into yourself over time, investing into a business that you want to grow, investing into a relationship that you want to grow, whatever it is, you can start small and you can learn from each step along the way. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, really well said. And as someone who's watched your journey, from afar on social, but also that you and I have connected on the phone and on text a couple of times, like everything you said, like you were able to sum that up in the 90 seconds, but like you literally got up at 3 o'clock in the morning for like a number of years.
Yeah.
And you were doing programming while you were going to see patients. You were staying up late. You were writing a business plan. You started writing a book somehow during all, like you had a podcast going, like you were juggling all these balls at once. So like, but like, guess what? You probably, like, just knowing you, I think you love that process.
I do.
So that in itself is a data point. Like that's important feedback. And if Joe woke up at 3 a.m, if he set his alarm for 3 a.m. and his gut said like, this is the right call. The punchline here for someone listening is, I always talk about I actually use this saying too often, and Caitlin busts my chops. I always say, well, my gut says, or I got this hunch, Caitlin's like, you and your gut, you and your hunch. It's like, but listen to your gut, listen to your instinct, like that inner dialogue and that conversation you're having with yourself. It's the most important one you can have. And take those feedback points to yourself, understand what makes you happy, understand what doesn't make you happy. And, like take action. Everything you just said, like my translation is you took a whole lot of action for a pretty long time while you held down your job. So if back to your initial point and question, like if you're not happy, start taking action, understand how that makes you feel. And then build a plan around that. Because once you do, it's super empowering, and, the sky's the limit from there, frankly, in my opinion.
Yeah. What I say is that I don't have a ceiling above me anymore. And I also don't necessarily have that safety net of a W-2 job beneath me, but I would take that any day of the week. And that's just me. Everybody's different. But with that being said, Todd, we're going to land this plane before I was trying to think of a word, but before your kids just wreak havoc.
Maniacs?
Yeah, you're maniacs. Before they get home. So the last question, and again, I think we touched on a lot of this, but if you were just to kind of condense this answer and speak to somebody who's going through a really tough season of life, maybe they're confused, maybe they're lost, maybe they're just feeling really down, and you get to speak to that person right now, what would you say to them?
Yeah. What I would say to that person is probably first and foremost, would be that you're not alone. There's probably a whole lot of people out there that are feeling the same exact way that you are. My first piece of advice would be to try to connect with some of those people, because even just feeling a certain level of human connection with someone who can relate to your story, I think would help a lot. It would also serve as someone to speak to and to think through your particular individual situation with. The next thing I would say would really just be to probably go pen to paper, and kind of write out, the things that make you happy. What do you actually enjoy doing? And start coming up with a plan around how things that you enjoy doing, are transferable or can relate to something that you would like to do or explore professionally. Do you sit at a desk job and on weekends you find yourself taking pictures like the entire weekend? Like, maybe you're supposed to be a freelance photographer, right? Like, do you have like a blog that you set up at night, like that you come home and you like blog your face out? Like, maybe you're supposed to be a blogger, right? The only way to know these things is to explore them. So continue exploring things that really genuinely make you happy. My inner fitness geek says, go get a sweat, because if you wake up and you work out, you're gonna have some clarity coming out of these workouts. You kind of combine that with some decent sleep and some mostly clean eating, and like you're gonna start to get a sense of like things that really excite you, and your brain will start kind of firing signals on things that you should probably be exploring. And then kind of the last piece of advice would just be to which is really in line with the first piece of advice, would be to build a network. Start reaching out to people, start maintaining some kind of a regular conversation, set up a weekly call with someone like Joe, or someone in your personal life, or a coach that you don't know who lives across the country. But like being able to think out loud through some of the stuff, to verbalize some of the frustrations that you might have, could really help someone with their situation, and understanding how to redefine what their situation is really supposed to look like. But it all starts with communication. You gotta reach out to someone, because people are willing to help. And then on the flip side of that, and then I'll zip it, Joe. But on the flip side of that is, if you're on the other side of that, go give someone some knucks when you walk by them. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them how their day is. Maybe their day is awesome. Maybe their day sucked, and they want to tell you a little bit about that. Just be kind. This is a concept, Joe, you and I have talked about. Be kind to people. How easy is that? Like, we take for granted the concept of being kind to strangers. Like, it feels good for everyone, but particularly the person who might not be having a great day. So, I explained the one scenario. If you're on the side of someone who's kind of struggling, if you're on the other side of that, and you don't kind of employ some kind of a regular, just a simple, kind gesture to strangers in your town, in your community, whatever, on social, be a good human. It's easier than you think.
It's not that hard. Now,
No.
Todd, we got to get you back into dad mode here in a second, but one, I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate your time and everything that you do in this world. If people resonated with something that you said, or they just want to follow along with your journey or connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yep. So the IG handle is entails all three things that we just talked about for about an hour. So it's iRun.iwork.idad. You can probably, I came up with the IG account. The Instagram account was basically a place during COVID where I just started dumping some fitness programming that I was doing at the time. I was training for a half Ironman. It became a place where I dumped, interesting podcasts I was listening to, or an interesting link to an article that I just read. But it's kind of a day in the life of someone who focuses on those three things in the account. I love running. I really enjoy my profession. I love to work hard. And I'm, for me, family is everything. And being a dad is, like I said earlier, the coolest job on the planet. So I work, I dad. And I'd love to connect with people on social. It's that account has led me to conversations like this with people like you. And the account has served me well in that sense of being able to connect with like-minded people. So I appreciate that. And I'm proud of you, dude. I'm proud that you now have this new podcast up and running, this new business venture. you're in your new home. You got the ball rolling, and you took a leap of faith. And to put it bluntly, that takes balls. So kudos to you. I'm proud of you, and I really appreciate you having me on, dude.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.